We are going to tell you the story of a ship that was built by this man, Brunel. It's an extraordinary story, and none of it would have happened if it hadn't been for the genius of this engineer. It really begins in 1838, when Brunel and the Great Western Steamship Company announced that they were going to build a second ship to travel between Great Britain and America. They built a special dry dock here in Bristol, and in 1839 they started to build the biggest, the fastest, and the most unusual ship that had ever been conceived. By July 1843 she was ready to launch. Imagine, if you can, what amazement the population of Bristol must have felt when they saw for the first time this giant ship completed, 320 feet long and almost 3,000 tons. But before we tell you the most extraordinary things about the construction of the Great Britain, because that was and still is her name, let's look at what happened at her launch. Thousands of people turned out, and a great number of them paid a guinea to see the launch, attend a royal banquet, and watch Prince Albert himself take part in the ceremony from a specially constructed pagoda. In fact, she wasn't as much launched as floated. When the water had been let into the dock and the ship was floating inside, the tug started pulling, the rope broke, the lady performing the ceremony dropped her champagne bottle in the water, and Prince Albert saved the day by throwing a reserve bottle and hitting the bow with a resounding crash from 20 feet. The prince then went back to the station, and by the time they finally got the ship out of the dock, he was halfway back to London. In fact, what with one thing and another, the whole operation was something of a shambles. Luckily, they didn't try to take her down the river that day, because as it turned out, the hull was built 5 feet 6 inches wider than the opening through the dock, and it took nearly 6 months to release her.
I'm Queen of the Waters. The ocean world has never yet seen a sail unfurled like mine o'er its billowy heaving breast, or seabird that carried a prouder crest.
What they were celebrating at their banquet, though they didn't know it, was the construction of the first real Atlantic liner. She was covered in gold leaf and decoration, which was all very impressive. But what was so remarkable about the Great Britain was not only that she was the biggest ship in the world, but that Brunel had decided to build her out of iron, and her engine was connected not to paddles, but to a screw. These 4 cylinders were no less than 6 feet 8 inches in diameter. They were connected to a wrought iron crankshaft, turning a drum over 18 feet across, which connected to the propeller shaft by 4 endless chains. The engine itself weighed 340 tons, and the engine and boiler room together were 117 feet long. There had never been anything like her before. She had a promenade deck built under cover so that the passengers could walk about without getting battered by wind and waves. She had a great gallery with windows let into the stern of the ship. Her staterooms accommodated 360 passengers, and her dining hall was, by shipping standards, nothing short of sumptuous. Luckily, this man, Fox Talbot, considered it worthwhile to take his newly invented camera all the way to Bristol and photograph her while she was being fitted out. Remember when you look at this photograph that it was taken 126 years ago, when her engines were actually being fitted. This picture has become enormously valuable, particularly to one man. He is a naval architect, and he knows more about the way the Great Britain was built than any other man living. His name is Dr. Ewan Corlett.
This ship really could be said to set the pace for shipbuilding for 100 years to come. Of course, as a naval architect, I was well aware of this. The thought struck me suddenly, why should we not do something about her? Why should we not check what condition she is, lying as she is, a hulk in the Falkland Islands? Can we bring her home? At any rate, let us find out and document the ship for posterity, so that the details of her design, the details of construction, how Brunel conceived the ship, will be known for all time.
This is a model of the Great Britain built by Vickers Armstrong so that they could test the hull and measure its performance in a tank. Look at the clipper bow. It was the first ever built quite that shape. As Dr. Corlett and the scientists discovered, The hull is very efficient indeed. And remember, there was no such thing as tank testing in 1840. The shipbuilder who actually drew her lines was working purely on experience and the classic rule that what looks right, works right. Her shape was the only thing that Brunel didn't work on. The hull that they tested was drawn up by a man called Patterson, and you only have to look at the bow to see that she was built for speed. She had the first large screw propeller and the first simplex rudder, built exactly like modern rudders are today. Vickers also tested the screw and the rudder with scale models, again working in the tank. The propeller weighed 4 tons. The 6 flat wrought iron blades were almost 16 feet in diameter. Not very efficient, but as nobody knew anything about propellers in those days, the amazing thing is not that it didn't work well, but that it managed to work at all. And work it did. In January 1845, the Great Britain steamed out of Bristol with her 6 masts and her distinguished passengers, straight into the teeth of a gale. Where most other ships would have broken up, she merely had a couple of plates buckled in the bow and steamed on. Despite the weather, she made 12.5 knots with her engine turning at 19 revolutions a minute. She arrived in London to a hero's welcome. She was visited by the Queen, and she stayed to bask in the glory for 5 months, before setting out on her maiden voyage to Liverpool and on to New York. We don't know how many passengers she carried, because the log of that first voyage has been lost. But we do know that burning between 70 and 80 tons of coal a day, she ploughed on, rolling badly and vibrating dramatically through strong headwinds. She covered 3,300 miles in 14 days and 21 hours, at an average speed of just over 9 knots. As she steamed up the East River at New York, she was the first screw-driven ship ever to have made an ocean voyage. She was a success, and her return voyage to Liverpool was completed without any trouble whatsoever. But there was one big problem which nobody realized. The blades on her propeller were working loose. On her next voyage, they started to come off, one by one. Eventually, on the way home from New York, she lost 5 blades out of 6 and limped home with 1. They decided to fit her with a new 4-bladed propeller and change her rig from 6 masts to 5. Away she went on 2 more round trips from Liverpool to New York and back again. It was the 5th voyage that turned out to be disaster. Her captain mistook a lighthouse in bad weather, and she went aground on a beach at Dundrum Bay in Northern Ireland. There was talk of abandoning her as a total write-off, but Brunel himself was determined to save her. He wrote to the owners.
The finest ship in the world has been left in his